Welcome back to the morning show. Thank you for staying tuned. Professor Jideofor Adibe is a professor of political science and international relations at Nasarawa State University in Kefi. He joins us now to, amongst other things, take a look at the likely impact of this week's turn of events on the longstanding diplomatic and bilateral relationship between Nigeria and the United States. It's good to have you join us this morning. Thank you, Professor.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, Hawa.
So, of course, this will be discussed ad nauseum for the next few days. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, but I wanted to ask you, with this redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern, and of course, this attack on Christmas Day and the abrupt recalling of our United States envoys, a lot of things have happened this last week. Some analysts are saying that, Nigeria-U.S. relations are at their lowest since the Abacha era. How does this transactional diplomacy from Washington change our standing as a regional leader in West Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much, Awa. I think the first thing to understand is that relations between countries are quite often dynamic, and is often also dependent on who the kind of leaders you have in different countries. Usually countries will use national interest to justify any decision they want to take, especially when it involves getting involved in the affairs of another country. Now, this is where it gets very tricky, because you can use national interest to justify any action, from, attacks to even passivity. For example, in international relation, you have what you can call preemptive strike, which means you can tell your domestic audience that you took an action because there is an imminent danger that if you allow certain capabilities to be developed in a third country, that will be used against you. That's called preemptive strike. Of course, there's always the moral issue of how do you define imminent. Then there is also the one they call preventive strike, in which case you can talk about a long term. That's, look, the threat may not be imminent, but if it is not nipped in the bud, it can be used against us. For example, a clear example, will be in 1991, where the Islamic Salvation Front was almost winning the election in Algeria, and there was a military coup, which some people suspected had the hands of foreign powers. And not just that FIS was, prevented from coming to power, the party was even banned. And that triggered the Algerian Civil War. So the point is, the way it is framed, sometimes you frame the justification for your intervention differently for your national audience, which I think Donald Trump has tried to do. And then it's now dependent on up to the Nigerian government to frame it for its own domestic audience, which also they've been trying to do by saying that, we were involved, it was a collaboration. Of course, we know that America will not get involved in any form of military collaboration in which it is not in charge. How will it affect going forward? Some people say Donald Trump is essentially a transactional leader. If you offer him, what he likes, he may change his mind. We can also get into another president who is more ideologically driven, like Joe Biden. And then they will be looking at issues from, do you have shared values, shared ideology? So it's not really going to, fundamentally change many things. It depends on, again, I said, in the leadership, it's not a discussion between the Tinubu leadership and the Trump leadership, how they see each other. But in terms of state relations, the important thing is the leverages a country can bring on the table at any point in time, not just nobody can come to you, intervene for you, or help you in fighting your wars purely on altruistic grounds. It doesn't happen that way in international relations.
All right, Prof, very well said, but let's also dimension the what has happened on Thursday a bit wider. What are your immediate thoughts as to the effect that this might have on the fight against terrorism? America says what it has done is precision strike. But then we see that by road from Sokoto to Offa in Kwara State, it's almost 700 kilometers. And then people are claiming that they got some debris of some of the bombs that were dropped, even in Offa. We can't directly clarify that now. But then if we are talking precision strikes, will that be very correct, or is another American wonder? And then how do you now dimension the whole fight on terror? Is this America's war, or is Nigeria truly fully involved?
Okay, let me disaggregate your questions. First of all, let me start with the notion of precision strike. It's an omnibus term. Is it precision in terms that when you strike, you get a target? Or is this precision in terms that, look, we're only looking for ISIS-affiliated terrorists? It's still a very nebulous term. But let me talk about Americans and the fight against terrorism. It didn't start today. As early as 1901, an American president, William McKinley, was assassinated. At that time, the people that were regarded as terrorists were the people known as the anarchists. And people who believe in the waves of terrorism theory will tell you that was the first wave of modern terrorism. Since then, he was assassinated on 6 September 1901. Since then, America had sworn to eliminate terrorism wherever it could see it. And coincidentally, exactly 100 years later, September 11, 9/11, 2001, another one happened, the attack in the US. So America has always been involved. You know, it takes it more like an article of faith in trying to fight terrorism. That's why I say that it's not just in Nigeria. They had also attacked Syria, preemptively. They are not looking at it now in an isolated case. It's part of a continued fight against terrorism. Back home, what does this tell us? It tells us about the problem of national building and nation building in Nigeria. I elsewhere mentioned that because of the fragility of the Nigerian state and because of the lack of consensus or on the parameters of even statehood, every problem, every solution thrown at our multifarious problems tend to become part of the problem. People were clamoring, let us fight this terrorism. They accuse the government of not doing enough. Then the government does something, it brings another problem. I can see already that people from the north are already like, it's becoming a north-south Christian something, dimension. And that's part of the problem of the country. It's not a problem of the President Tinubu. Any other person could have, it could have happened under any other president. For example, Gumi was saying, bring in Pakistan, bring in Turkey, and bring in China. China will never get involved in external intervention unless the only time it can get involved is if it touches Taiwan. So you remove China. Turkey is a Muslim state, a Muslim-dominated state. Pakistan is a no-go area for many Christians. So even if you were to yield to the recommendations of Gumi, the Christians will shout. So that is why I think we should also go back and start to build a nation. When we build a nation, we achieve a consensus on the things that matter. And for as long as we have not built a nation and our leaders are not helping matters, any problem, no matter, just think of any solution we have tried to throw at any problem, it becomes part of the problem. That is what's happening at that level. How will it affect the fight of terrorism? We say that terrorism is never defeated. And this is the argument of people who believe in the waves of terrorism theory. And they can tell you from what they call the anarchist phase that lasted from 1879 to the 1920s, to the anti-colonial waves, to the up to the one they call the religious wave, which is what we have now, starting from 1979. And their argument is that each one will last for approximately 40 years and then collapse into another wave. That is the thinking of some people in terms of waves. So it may not be called terrorism at that time, but there will always be those challenges. But I believe that if our leaders were able to focus on building consensus, not just to play to the gallery of your ethnic and religious in-groups, then we become close. It becomes easier for us to be able to confront other challenges that come our way without solutions we try to throw at our problems, compounding the problems themselves.
Well said, Professor. Now, with the Sahel Alliance, the AES, moving away from Western influence, and of course our dealings with our neighbors, does this U.S. military presence in Nigeria make us a target for our neighbors? Or is it a situation where it solidifies us as the Western outpost in West Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't think it's only about the Sahel states. That's a dimension of it. Sahel will have implications in terms of their own. Already they've moved away from ECOWAS, and they're forced to lobby them to come back. I think is already lost. President Tinubu, seen as being very close to France, it's not going to help matters. But in other areas, in identity studies, we say that the identity that is perceived to be under threat is the one most vociferously defended. In other words, don't forget that a few days before the attack, Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel was reported to have said, I don't know if that was AI, that purported attacks on Christian must stop. Now, because Israel is an enemy, quote unquote, of most Muslim-dominated countries, I say this, my only evidence is that if you go to the United Nations, of the 193 members in the UN, about 32 countries do not recognize the state of Israel, out of which 27 are from Muslim-dominated countries. So they will just feel it will galvanize the Muslim communities. Look, this is a collaboration. The rhetoric from Trump, which is targeted towards his domestic environment, especially its right-wing religious groups that he's playing to. Now, it might tend to bring the Muslims together, especially the radical Muslims. That will be a challenge we may have to, be prepared for. That it might, rather than help, be able to, compound the problems it was set to solve. That's one dimension of it. But with regards to the French-speaking countries, especially the Sahel states, I actually expect that more French-speaking countries may distance themselves from Nigeria because of their, very unfavorable disposition towards France. And suddenly, Nigeria being seen as moving closer to France. Now that they push them, they're increasingly distancing themselves from France, and France is being given an opportunity to come to Nigeria. In fact, the first visit of Tinubu, they brought out red carpet in a manner that suggested that this is just more than a state visit. So we have to wait and see. There is no hard and fast rules about this. But yes, there are threats, but there are also opportunities.
As the first place where the joint effort or the American-led intervention, had to strike at. A lot of people have been wondering, expressing different, divergent views as to why Sokoto. Maybe Tangaza, that our reporter is saying that, yeah, there were specific targets there. Maybe, of course, American intelligence and our own intelligence know far more than ordinary people. But people are saying that, why not in Borno? Why not in Niger State, where people have been kidnapped? Why not in Plateau, Benue? I'd like to know what your thoughts are on, Sokoto being the first place. And then also, how concerning is it to you that in all of this, between the US and Nigeria, there's no direct, at least to the public, there's no direct intervention between the two presidents, between President Trump and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Not a single time has Trump mentioned the name of our president. Yes, throwing brickbats, etc. at Nigeria. Is it concerning, therefore, that for a strike like that to happen We're hearing the minister speak with Pete Hegseth. We're hearing, the NSA meeting with Hegseth. But then a strike was about to happen. There were talks, 19 minutes to the strike, 5 minutes to the strike, but not between Trump and Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Should we worry about this sort of, should I say, disdain, in quotes?
Well, we can only speculate, Steve, because we don't know what goes behind the curtains. We don't know their perceptions. Remember, after the president of Buhari, what Trump was reported to have said about him. Now, so far, we haven't heard the president say such things about President Tinubu. So we can say at least he got a better mark than Buhari, that he invited to the State House and then used very uncomplimentary terms to describe him. About the choice of location, if you read the report from the BBC, and they talked about the Lakrawa, and that they were using that place as a staging post, the place they attacked. So, and it is not necessary that the epicenter of where their camps are or their headquarters are will be the place that the cells carry out their activities. We don't know, we don't have the full intelligence. It is also possible that what happens that they have the intelligence that they are using this place to stage an imminent attack, and therefore they struck. But in international relations, you don't show all your hands. There are conversations that will be strictly between the top layers, like the president to president, and then there are those ones that you give to the public right to know. So we don't have, maybe if they are planning for future attacks, they may regard what we can call as transparency as being antithetical to the sort of secrecy needed for such operations to be very effective in future. About what happened in Ofa, in Kwara State, and in Jabo, what we heard, or what I read somewhere, that these are debris from the strike that fell on those places. Well, we don't know. I mean, remember, if there's any states across the world tend to be the number one in terms of misinformation, deliberate misinformation. But I believe in the days ahead, we'll get more information. More information will be in the public domain, in which we'll then be able to piece together and be able to arrive at certain tentative conclusions.
Through with his America First agenda by withdrawing this traditional diplomacy while increasing these kinds of drone strikes. What does the new normal look like for Nigerian foreign policy over the next couple of years of the Tinubu presidency?
Well, first thing is that your foreign policy derives its strength from your domestic policy and the extent to which you are able to achieve elite consensus in your own country. So we have very little leverage in this regard. And as I said, America and Donald Trump is playing to an audience, and that is his own primary concern. He's playing first to his Christian rights. He's playing to the America, there's no country in the world that is as strong as America, America first. And this resonates with his own constituency. And if you want to shift a little bit away from that to look at possible traditional diplomacy where they will try to make sure that other countries are involved, you see that you read the work of Pete Hegseth, and you start to see where it's in collaboration with our Nigerian partners. But let me bring in one doctrine that's also very important in our trying to understand what's happening. There is a doctrine known as responsibility to protect. I've heard so many people talk about sovereignty, but the notion of sovereignty has evolved. For example, in 2005, you have the UN World Summit, which is the most attended by heads of states and government in history, and they endorsed a document from the International Committee on State and on Intervention and Sovereignty, which simply says that international community can intervene in other countries to protect against genocide, against other crimes. And this happened in the wake of what happened in Yugoslavia and Rwanda in the 1990s. And so you can actually use that as a justification, to intervene, apart from the notion of preemptive strike that I mentioned earlier. So this responsibility to protect, you cannot just be talking just about sovereignty. Now they've made sovereignty to be an obligation. In fact, the African Union also adopted or domesticated the same doctrine when it talked about a move away from non-interference to non-indifference. So it has a consensus that in certain conditions, countries will move in. Nigeria also moved into help Benin Republic. Officially, it was because Benin Republic invited a country to help. It is possible that it's, as some people suggested, it was being prodded by France. It is also possible that Nigeria is having a bigger picture that if we allow crisis in Benin Republic, there will be a lot of immigration from Benin Republic which will overwhelm our system. So in that case, it becomes frames in national interest. But these are sometimes not the way you frame it among your policy think tanks may not be the same way you frame it in your own, towards your own domestic policy. So all these things are very fluid.
All right, Prof. Before we let you go, just a very quick one. How do you think that all this might be politicized in Nigeria, given the nature of the sort of politics that we play here? Already, the big tent, which is associated with Mr. Peter Obi, is demanding an apology from the federal government to Mr. Obi, who said earlier, when Nigeria was designated as a country of a particular concern, that he will, if he were the president, he will welcome a military intervention. And now that America's military intervention has come, the big tent is asking that an apology should be given to Obi. What will be your key advice to the political players in Nigeria at this time, and not to politicize what is going on? Briefly, sir.
Well, if you ask them not to politicize, you're asking them not to become politicians anymore. So what Peter Obi's the big tent said is expected. It's a matter of, I told you, you see, if I were in charge, I would be different, I would be better. So it's expected. But let me also use the opportunity to say one thing. The number of people they camping to APC, supporters of the president, believe that it's a done day, 2027. Maybe not. And there are things in strategic studies, we say something. There's something they call a fog of war. No matter how much you will be able to isolate all the variables and assign them weight, there is always one you may not be able to anticipate, which will come in to become the game changer. So it's not a done deal. You remember the transformation ambassadors of Nigeria under Jonathan? Yeah. We thought it was a done deal. What happened? 22 APC governors supported Tinubu. He only won 12. 12 PDP governors supported Atiku. He only won 5. So there is still a long way, and there are certain, if Trump or another external player tomorrow, because they don't intervene directly, they just try to influence the way the discussions are framed.
You think the X factor
comes on with a bomb?
Do you think the X factor could be the Trump factor?
No, I said it is possible. Trump is a transactional leader. For now, it's looking like that. But if tomorrow you offer him a deal he cannot refuse, it may change the game. Remember, he wrote a book in 1987 called The Art of the Deal, in which he regards himself as the ultimate deal maker. So it depends. What I'm saying is that it should not discourage the opposition. And at the same time, it's politics. Anything can happen between now and by the way, Steve, who tells you that we'll all be alive by 2027?
We would love to be. On that note, Professor Jideofor Adibe, we want to thank you for a brilliant discussion on the morning show today. Thank you indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.